The headline was about China cutting some rates on a 1-year rate and not a 5-year rate. And I think normally in a normal world, you just be like, I don't care what China is doing at all in any way, shape, or form. I can understand not being worried about what China does. But what happens when what China does has an absolute effect to where you live in the Midwest? That the global economy is clearly at your doorstep. It is in what you buy that gets delivered to your doorstep at Amazon. It is what you're buying at the store. It is how the people dealing with your retirement fund feel at any one moment, never mind the things that they're actually investing in. To understand how it affects us, we first have to understand the fact that what's happening in China matters to us. This is happening not because you like it, not because you want it to, but because it is. And if you don't understand it, you ain't ever going to understand how to deal with it. Guys, welcome to the show presented by Americans for Prosperity, AmericansForProsperity.org. Economic liberty, free speech. That is where it's at. This is Dr. Matt Will, economist at the University of Indianapolis, who we bring in to break down these things. You know, it was two parts, right? It was the Wall Street Journal saying rates in China cut again, but by less than expected. You have CNBC. China's central bank trims 1-year rate, but unexpectedly leaves their 5-year rate unchanged. They are talking about the rate that their central bank charges for a loan. A 1-year loan price goes down, a 5-year loan price stays the same. When you saw this, what did you say to yourself, and what did the investor class say?
Tony, what I saw, we talked about some of this on Friday, and between Friday and today, a lot has changed. Things that are alarming me and alarming people who look at the Chinese economy, because they cut their rate, Tony. We're not cutting rates right now. The Fed is increasing rates. The European Central Bank is increasing rates. The United Kingdom is increasing rates. They're trying to control inflation. China's doing the opposite. What does that tell us, Tony? That tells us that they may be not inflation, but past hyperinflation into recession, depression mode, similar to what we've seen in Japan for the last 30 years. People don't even realize the Japanese economy has been at the same GDP level for 30 years. Rates up, rates down, it doesn't matter. China may be in a lot more desperate condition, Tony, a lot worse than we realized just 3 days ago.
Let's make sure we understand what we're saying. We have seen inflation increase in the United States, and therefore you have seen interest rates go up. Interest rates going up in the United States have hit in a lot of places, and certainly real estate is one of them. I want to share this with you. This is a two-parter that took place on CNN. I think it was actually, it was just the other day. It was just the other day. Watch this. Listen to this.
So this morning, mortgage rates in the United States have soared to their highest level in more than 20 years. Now, according to the data from Freddie Mac, the 30-year fixed-rate mortgage averaged above 7% over the week ending yesterday. A year ago, just over 5%.
Now, that's the story. A year ago, 5%, now 7%. But let's go back 2 years when the inflation really started to become a conversation.
Let me just show you, to your point, what mortgage rates have looked like over the last few years. Now, if you were lucky enough to lock in rates in August of 2021, well done. Let's say your mortgage repayments was $1,000 there. Today, your option is paying double that, even for average income families. That's a huge whack. So you understand the problem here. Now, it's great, let's be clear, if you're a home owner, but if the big American dream is to own your home, perhaps leave that money to your kids one day, that's getting further and further away.
In 2021, 2.86% on a 30-year fixed, now 7.09, and that number is going to hit 7.3. And these things are going up because interest rates were pushed up. What the Federal Reserve is charging people to share money, to borrow money, lend money, if you will. And these things have gone up. We have all felt the effects of it. You're now discussing the fact that China has cut rates, and that indicator to you is not things are good, but things are worse than they told us originally.
Tony, it's beyond desperation, because Think of it like this. Think of China as being 3 years ahead of us or 2 years ahead of us. They had hyperinflation. Now, they'll say, no, 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 our inflation was mild. We know the Chinese government lies. I'll give you an example. We have a lot of Chinese students who come to the University of Indianapolis. The first thing we do is put them on a bus and take them down to the outlet malls in Edinburgh so that they can purchase a lot of stuff made in China because it's so expensive in China. So Chinese government lies about their inflation. So they've been through hyperinflation. They now, Tony, are towards recession, depression direction. And so what are they trying to do? They're trying to spur some growth. So they're desperate. They're cutting their rates, hoping that people will borrow cheap money and buy stuff. Tony, this is the ultimate sign of desperation, that they're trying to juice the economy. They're giving that an injection of morphine saying, get going. Tony, this is not a good sign. And there's going to be ripple effects.
But the injection of morphine is an interesting line, because that's meant to dull the senses. Talking to Dr. Matt Will, economist at the University of Indianapolis, the idea of cutting the rates, is that the same idea as when we discuss Keynesian economics, John Maynard Keynes, and the idea that how you get an economy going is to prime the pump? Spending is what actually moves an economy. Now, I'm not a believer in this economic philosophy. I think it's absolutely horrific. I think that F.A. Hayek is much more on track in the conversation of savings and what that does for an economy. But is this the attempt? Lower that rate, get that quick money going into the system, or at least getting it borrowed, and somehow that's going to work out for them. Is that the plan? And has that ever in history worked out for a nation?
Tony, that's exactly the plan. And no, it has never worked out in history. And that's exactly what we're seeing China do right now. They've had the inflation. They've been fighting the inflation monster unsuccessfully. Again, they lie about their data. We know on the ground from businesses what they're experiencing. Their economy has slowed. In fact, again, their data is false. They may actually be in a recession already. And they are so desperate to get it going that they're trying to inject it right now with some juice to get this thing moving. So you're right. Morphine may have not been the right analogy, but they're trying to put some drug in this economy to get it going. That's a sign of desperation. And that's what we see happening. Tony, they used to lend money, and they still do, to say, hey, build a building. We talked about this on Friday. Put up a ghost city just to get people working, building stuff, making things. Tony, it didn't work. Evergrande went under. The top 3 indices of REITs in Singapore for China are down 66% year-over-year.
Definition, REIT.
Oh, a real estate investment trust. So it's like a mutual fund that invests in real estate. So the top 3 mutual funds, if you will, called REITs, that invest in Chinese real estate are down 2/3 year-over-year. This is more than just Evergrande. So the Chinese government is going nuts. They're thinking, okay, real estate's bursting. What do we do? Quick, give the economy some drugs, cheap money. Tony, it's not working. The ripple effect you talked about at the beginning. We may want to get into it. How is this going to affect everybody else, that the Chinese economy is collapsing?
Oh, we are going to get into it. Talking to Dr. Matt Will, economist at the University of Indianapolis. Yes, the word you're looking for is epinephrine or adrenaline.
Yes.
That is the shot that these economies are looking for. Knowing that something doesn't work is not often the thing that stops people from doing the thing. We see this time and again, and certainly we see that China has been willing to lie. We talked about Evergrande, which is this real estate conglomerate, if you will. They've lost $81 billion between 2021 and now. They've gone to Manhattan courts and other courts around the globe to declare bankruptcy because of their real estate holdings, and that there's nothing there. And this was a problem to you, as we discussed it last week, but also predictable as we talk about the ghost cities, the building of apartments that nobody is going to rent, because even China doesn't have enough people to rent them. They certainly don't have the money to rent them. This, in the cutting of the rates, you see as much bigger of a problem. We know that they don't report their youth unemployment anymore. How many economists like yourself saw that news today about China cutting 1-year rates and said, oh, this is really bad?
Well, I'll give you the information on that one, Tony. UBS announced today a significant cut in the growth forecast for the Chinese economy. UBS, one of the largest banks in the world. This is on the heels of JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Barclays, Nomura. So, Tony, other banks, the major economic analysis institutions in this world, are cutting the growth forecast for China. And it gets worse because China is nervous about these banks doing this, because these banks are cutting their forecast, because they're giving the public information that China doesn't want you to have. They're now attacking these financial institutions. Tony, a company called Mintz Group, which is one of the major statistical analysis financial research companies in the world, they were fined $1.5 million by the Chinese government this week for doing statistical analysis on the economy.
For telling the truth.
Yes.
Right.
$1.5 million for just telling the truth. They were raided. Bain Capital had their offices raided for the same reason.
Talking to Dr. Matt Will, economist at the University of Indianapolis. Now let's get into it. And certainly, as there are global pressures, there are going to we're going to feel an effect on a very, very large scale level in the United States. And there is global recession. We know there's recession in Europe, and we know that China lies. And since so many nations depend on China for the purchase of cheap and effective goods, there is an effect throughout the economy. Get into some Midwest specifics here, because we often hear about how these things affect Wall Street. Well, there's a lot more than Wall Street out there. Midwest Main Street has been feeling the effects of this economy for 3 years. As somebody put in the comments, Bidenomics is clearly working, which it isn't. But I don't know if you can blame everything in China on Bidenomics. How does the China situation affect Midwest Main Street?
Tony, let me first tell you how it in fact impacts Japan. I know that's coming out of left field here. Japan, which remember back in the 80s was like the growing economy, the one that we were looking at as our major competitor, they stalled. Their economy has been totally stalled in depression/recession for 30 years. Japan had 6% growth last quarter. 6%. Why? Because they're getting business from China. They're now becoming an exporter like they were in the 80s. We buy stuff from China, Tony. We buy cheap goods. We buy our supply chain. So when China suffers, there's an impact on us. Less goods, supply chain slows down. You don't have as many choices, and the things are not as cheap. We had a recession, Tony, in 2008 that we caused. The U.S. economy, real estate bubble burst, caused a global recession. China is going to do the same thing.
Do you parallel it that much?
Yes, Tony, they're the second biggest economy in the world. I mean, they gave us COVID and look what happened. China can impact the world. They did it with a virus. They're going to do it with the economy. It's going to happen.
Talk to me about what people on Midwest Main Street will see first. I mean, we already have things that we have seen, but that has come from levels of U.S. spending, lies about the Inflation Reduction Act, and other things. We're talking about the price of milk, the price of eggs. Gas last week was at $3.85 a gallon. I don't know what the average is now, but it was the highest it was in 10 months. As China starts to implode, number one, what is it that we will see on the front lines? And then number two, what should we be looking for down the road as an indicator of further implosion?
Well, down the road and right now are linked, Tony, because what businesses have already started doing very quietly behind the scenes is shifting their resources from China to India, to Taiwan, to Japan, to South Korea. You know, we see this monumental meeting between Biden, South Korea, and Japan happening right now, which I think is a good thing. These two countries hate each other, South Korea and Japan, yet they're coming together as a substitute in part, not just for national security, of economic agreement against China. So you're going to start seeing shifting of things. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. That's the long-term, short-term connection, Tony. Over time, we're going to slowly wean ourselves off the Chinese economy. That's not easy. That is not going to happen quick. And there is pain involved in that when you don't get things you need. Tony, things you buy in your daily life, in your computer and your cell phone, are made in China.
So the question is, do you start seeing less of that stuff in the store, or do you start seeing, never mind the cell phone, how about t-shirts? How about the way you clothe your kids when you've got young kids and you're buying inexpensive clothes because they burn through it so quick, and that $2 t-shirt is now a $3.50 t-shirt, or the pair of jeans or the pair of shoes is up $5.75, and it's no longer made in China, it's made somewhere else. And certainly I want to see that manufacturing coming back to the US, but it involves a cost. When do you believe the average consumer, Midwest consumer, start seeing that price increase? Never mind the price increases they've already seen because of our own inflation. I'm talking about because specifically of the China implosion.
Tony, you already see it. And what's going to happen is we're going to confuse it. We're going to see the price increases because we think it's related to the Bidenomics inflation, when in fact it's related to the Chinese inflation. So you're going to see that connection happen immediately and continue on. I actually think long-term, it's going to be beneficial. I think maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, we'll wean ourselves off of the Chinese economy. It's not easy. It's going to be painful. So just to warn people, but it will happen, but it's going to take a few years.
And China is going to look to other places to try and gain back that economy. And that creates a very unstable world, watching their relationship with Russia, watching their relationship with Iran and with others. We'll follow that as well. Dr. Matt Will, economist at the University of Indianapolis. Follow him on Twitter at DRMATTWILL, Twitter X app. I don't know what we call it anymore. I can't think that far ahead on it. Dr. Matt Will, always a pleasure. And my thanks to you as well for being a part of the show. Guys, we're growing because of you. We want to grow bigger. We want to grow more and more. Are these the kind of interviews you want to see? What's the other stuff? I don't want to talk about what everybody else is talking about. There is interesting stuff to get into on all the levels. That's where I want to be. So what is it that you want to hear? What is it that you want to learn about? Let me know. Tony at TonyKatz.com. You can email me. You can find me on Twitter at Tony Katz, Tony at TonyKatz.com. Let me know. I'm happy to talk, but getting in depth, that's where it's at. The surface stuff is nonsense. And guys, my thanks to Americans for Prosperity, my sponsor, Economic Liberty and Free Speech. You got to check out an AFP chapter near you, see what they're doing, check out the policies they're pushing, see if it works for you. Americansforprosperity.org. And I will catch you next time, everyone. Take care.